debate on why Jones should have an ADP of 38, and I'm totally willing to listen. So if this is where you stand, leave a comment down below telling me why he shouldn't go in the first 3 rounds. But the injury-prone argument isn't going to get you very far, because while Jones dealt with a nagging hamstring injury all of last year and was on the field for only 9 games, he's played at least 14 games in each of his last 6 seasons. And in those seasons, he was the wide receiver 3, 2, 7, 6, 6, and 6. This year, Jones is being drafted as the wide receiver 17. So sure, the Titans have a 2,000-yard rusher in Derrick Henry and another elite receiver in A.J. Brown. But the Falcons had another alpha receiver in Calvin Ridley last year, and Jones was the wide receiver 3 in the 7 games that he played to completion. Yeah, you heard that right. In the 7 games Jones played from start to finish, he was the wide receiver 3, averaging 100 yards per game with a 76.3% catch rate, 11.9 yards per target, and 15.6 yards per reception. I totally understand. He's 32 years old now. He's getting up there in age. But Jones showed absolutely 0 signs of age deterioration last year. Actually, he was incredible when on the field. Arthur Smith might be gone, with Todd Downing being installed as the new offensive coordinator in Tennessee. But it's hard to believe this Titans offense can't easily support 2 elite wide receiver seasons. They churned out 2 top 30 receivers last year, with one of them being Corey Davis, and the since-departed Jonnu Smith caught 8 touchdowns on the year. Plus, there's no way Henry handles another 378 carries. The best part about all this is we don't need another top 5 season from Jones at his ADP. He just needs to be better than some of the 16 receivers going ahead of him. It's actually quite shocking that there are so many people out there who are unwilling to draft Ezekiel Elliott when they're sitting at the 5 spot in drafts. It's also funny how quickly we can flip our opinions on a player after one down or up season without providing any real context. Let me provide that context for you, and we'll start with the bad. Elliott averaged a career worst 4 yards per attempt last season. He also managed only 6 touchdowns on 45 red zone carries and 5 touchdowns on 26 carries inside the 5. Elliott failed to reach 1,000 rushing yards for the first time since 2017, where he had 983 yards in only 10 games. And finally, last season he averaged only 2.82 yards per contact after attempt. Pretty bad, right? On the surface, sure, this would be considered a wildly underwhelming season from Elliott. But that's without acknowledging everything that went wrong for Dallas in 2020. And Elliott was still the RB9 in PPR leagues. Moreover, Elliott was the RB2 through the first 5 weeks of the season before Dak Prescott was lost for the year, and finished top 10 in running back targets for the 3rd straight season. He ran behind an offensive line that was gutted by injuries and was constantly playing from behind thanks to god-awful defense and putrid quarterback play. Fast forward to 2021, where the Cowboys have a 9.5 game win total, a healthy Prescott and offensive line, and a running back in Elliott who looks like he was created in a lab. Dak Prescott wasn't lying when he said Elliott was in the best shape of his life. And you're crazy if you think he won't see positive touchdown regression this year too. If you isolate his 10 games from 2017, Elliott has been the RB5 or better in every single season but 2020.
It is the Awesemo MLB Strategy Show, and a lot going on today because we've got 14 baseball games kind of spread out over the course of the day. So we've got 2 separate slates to talk about. We're going to hit on the early slate, then we're going to talk about the main slate a little bit. So a little bit of everything. If you guys are new to the show also, or even if you're old to the show, actually, I don't know why I prefaced it that way. We're going to be trying something a little bit new. Leave a comment down below, and throughout the day, I'm going to check in. I'm going to try to answer some of those questions. Also, all the other good stuff, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, but be sure to leave a comment. Let's get some discussion going underneath. But other than that, Terry, big slate. How's your weekend going?
Weekend's going all right. Got out to a little bit of a slow start on the DFS side. Another bit of a down night, better than the night before for me. A few calls that went the right way, but just didn't all come together with the hitting for me. But lazy kind of a Friday. Been up for about an hour and change this morning, just diving right into this slate. Heavy baseball day for me. Got 2 shows today and an article to do. So I am all about this baseball slate today. How about you? How's things?
I mean, yesterday's slate cannot have been more disappointing, just from a standpoint of I never really had a chance because I was really heavy on like Eduardo Rodriguez, and he goes out, he gets hurt in the second inning, and then it's like, okay, that's a bunch of my lineups that are dead. He was my like second or third most rostered starting pitcher, and then the one bet I had on last night's games, it was Alex Cobb for over 4.5 strikeouts. He's looking pretty well. He's got 4 strikeouts through 5 innings. He's got the bottom of the order coming up in the next thing. It's like, all right, he's going to hit it here. And then he gets hurt throwing warm up. So yesterday was not meant to be for me today. But now we've got today's games to talk about. And once again, Yankees, Red Sox matchup. Jameson Taillon on the mound for the Yankees. On the hill for Boston, it's going to be Nathan Eovaldi. So now keep in mind, guys, that we're going to be talking about the early slate, then the main slate. So some of the pitchers we like is going to be, relative to that individual slate. But the early slate here that we're talking about is the 4-game slate on FanDuel and DraftKings. So what do you make of this pitching matchup here at Eovaldi against Jameson Taillon?
I mean, Eovaldi is the quality in this game. If we're looking for one of these two guys, I just hate this entire pitching slate, to be quite honest, in these early 4 games. I've got one guy who projects out, let's call it roughly double everybody else, but Eovaldi is the next highest projected guy after that guy that we'll get to today. So for sites where you need 2 pitchers, he's my number 2. I think he's a clear go-to. He's drawing a ton of ownership, pitching relatively well, 23.3% strikeout rate, a 3.59 xFIP on the season, induces 12.1% swinging strikes, only allows 5.6% barrels and a 34.1% hard hit rate. All of that is relatively good, but it's not an extreme strikeout rate or anything like that. The Yankees are going to give him some bonus strikeouts, most likely 25% strikeout rate overall for that projected awful Yankees lineup. If you don't get Gary Sanchez in there, that's another professional bat, at least with some power in it out of the middle of that lineup. So it's just a diminished Yankees team. So I wouldn't have much issues going with Eovaldi here. I do, worry just in general. He's never been a pitcher that I've really trusted. I think we're seeing a little bit of smoke and mirrors when he's good. Usually I always expect that regression to the version of Eovaldi that has a little bit less control, puts too many guys on base. But on this slate, I think he's going to be pretty mandatory where you need 2 starters, and he's the clear next best pivot to Scherzer.
Yeah, and then I have a quick question here, just because I forgot to look at this before, and I haven't actually seen anything on it. Do we know when the Yankees are supposed to get Judge and some of these other guys back? Because the lineup is so poor as they've put out in recent games.
So Loizaga was caught up in that, and he just got back, I think. I'm pretty sure he's back in the bullpen. I haven't seen a report on Judge. I can Google it real quick, but I'm just going to be doing that as well. I actually did mean to look it up and see if we've got any kind of report, but I haven't seen one. Aaron Judge on verge of big steps for return to COVID. When are Gio expected to return? Apologies if this plays something. It looks like Gio was taking pregame warmups. Aaron Judge not quite ready to return to the team. Judge and Higgy are coming up on. All right, so they're going to Tampa with the team on Monday. So hopefully later this week.
Okay.
It looks like maybe Urshela will be back tomorrow.
Yeah, for at least for today's purposes, that's the thing. I just want to make sure we're talking about these games, and not that we know for sure because the game doesn't lock until 6 hours from now. But I mean, the Yankees lineup they've been playing lately. Like here's what they had at the bottom of their order last night. It was Gardner, Gittins, Lamar, and Greg Allen. Like that's the bottom half of their lineup. That's miserable. So as long as that's going to be the case. And that's one of the reasons also I liked Eduardo Rodriguez yesterday. Number one, I think he's headed for positive regression. I think he's going to be a good pitcher the rest of the season, unless he's, significantly hurt after last night. But, regardless of what we think about Nathan Eovaldi, the Yankees, half of their lineup right now is just not major league hitters. So that is something that has gravitated me towards pitchers going up against New York as of late. It's been an offense already that's underperformed for the season. And now they just don't have a lot of the regular players in. So with that in mind, Eovaldi becomes, a fairly high priority play. But then on the other side of the mound, Jameson Taillon, somebody else who's underperformed his underlying stats a little bit this year. It's hard for me to really trust him going up against Boston. They have such a strong offense. But I guess the question here is how much Red Sox stacks do you really want to get to? They are fairly popular for the early slate.
Yeah, I think they're really popular, makes them a little bit difficult to roster. Although if you're playing on DraftKings, and a little bit on FanDuel, it looks a little bit more pronounced on DK, where the back end of that lineup starts to shed some of that ownership. So you can definitely get to some stacks that include the back end. Maybe you start in the middle of the lineup and go down instead of starting at the top and using the top half and grab some of those sneakier hitters. You don't get the traditional wraparound guy from this lineup where you're getting a guy who's on base and running and acting like a second leadoff hitter for the top end. with Christian Vasquez and Bobby Dahlbeck. Those are two, power hitter, not on base type of guys. Dahlbeck in particular, Vasquez has been disappointing with the power this year. Everybody else in the lineup above Verdugo in the 6th spot is getting a fair amount of attention. JD is at 4,000 and not drawing ridiculous ownership by comparison to like Devers. So he'd at least be somewhat interesting. Maybe if you're looking for a one-off for some power, I would grab JD Martinez. But I think they're going to be on a 4-game slate. They're going to be pretty mandatory. So it's going to be about what you can put them together with otherwise. Like, what's your second stack? Are you using, maybe a 2-man stack with them and a couple one-offs and getting to a pitcher? So depending on how you're threading it together, I think they're going to be an important part of the slate. I think he's, a very targetable pitcher here. We're talking about a guy who gives up a 40% hard hit rate, 21.2 degree average launch angle, 8.6% barrel ball rate. That plays pretty well for home run power. We know how dangerous these Red Sox are for home runs. So I don't love the spot for my Yankees again today.
Yeah, and listen, Jameson time, it's funny. I'm actually looking just kind of at the bigger picture, all the pitchers on the slate. And, I think almost to an extent we have to get at least a little bit of tie on if you're max entering, just because there are so few good pitching options on the slate. Because, looking ahead to the next game, we've got Drew Smyly versus Vince Velasquez. Vince Velasquez is chalk on DraftKings, and it's not because I think anybody thinks Vince Velasquez, like, oh, look at him against the Braves. This is a great spot to play Vince Velasquez. It's just because the pitching options are so weak for the slate. We need to roster 2 of them on DK. So at 7,700, Vince Velasquez is picking up 25% ownership right now on DraftKings. So with that in mind, I would think, well, maybe that makes the Braves a good leverage stack. But the Braves are picking up a little bit too much ownership too. So I'm kind of looking at this as a spot where I want to be a little bit underweight to Velasquez and underweight to Brave stacks.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm not the biggest Velasquez fan in the world in general. I don't really trust the guy. So, yeah, if you wanted to pick up a few shares of low on Tyon, he's under 10% owned on the DK slate, only costs 7,400. I think that makes plenty of sense. You can certainly roster him, double the field without too much fanfare, without shooting yourself in the foot too badly if he gets tattooed by this Red Sox team. We've seen him put up some decent starts throughout the year. He's not been good overall. He's a guy who's had multiple surgeries in his career, never hit the peak that he was supposed to, but he's pitching to a 23.7% strikeout rate this season, inducing 12.1% swinging strikes. Gives up the premium contact that I talked about. I don't trust him. I don't love the fact that he's pitching in this park for my team today. But yeah, DFS-wise, I think you can justify it based on that ownership and based on the price and the lack of quality options on this slate.
Yeah, and then on the other side going against him, Drew Smyly, who on a lot of slates for Smyly pitches, I think we could reliably say that he is in the discussion to be the worst starting pitcher, but that is not going to be today because we have Matt Harvey also making an appearance on the early slate. But Drew Smyly's numbers for the year, he has a 4.5 ERA, 4.6 expected ERA, 5.14 FIP, really not generating swing and misses this year. So we've got Smyly only a 20.5% K rate. He was pitching pretty well last year, but also it was only in a 26-inning sample size. But then also the other thing that makes Smyly generally appealing to stack against, pretty high fly ball pitcher, ground ball rate sub 40%, and that is combined with 15.2% home run and fly ball rate. So Drew Smyly is a guy who not only is getting hit hard and giving up a lot of runs this year, but he's also giving up a good amount of home runs. So that generally makes him somebody who's, pretty appealing to stack against. So what do you think about Nationals or Philly stacks going up against Drew Smyly?
Yeah, Phillies are popping a little bit in my model, drawing some nice power marks there going up against Smyly. I agree. I think he's targetable here, giving up a pretty significant 9.4% barrel ball rate, a 16.5 degree launch angle that plays pretty well into home run power, 39.8% hard hit rate. He's pitched to a 4.88 xFIP on the season with a 1.33 whip, walking a few too many guys at an 8.3% walk rate, 20.5% strikeouts. This isn't the guy that the Braves went out and got this season. They're very disappointed. They were actually kind of internally supposed to be pretty excited about bringing in Smyly this year. He profiled well for what is supposed to be a smart organization with pitching, but it just didn't come together. Just to clean up real quick, the numbers I read off before when you asked the question about Velasquez, I thought we were still on whether or not Tyon made sense. So those were his numbers. Velasquez is at a 24.3% strikeout rate, but an ugly 12.6% walk rate. And he's also allowing too many barrels, too big a launch angle, ton of hard hit. So he's super targetable as well. I like bats on both sides of this one. So this would be all about the bats in this game for me. I can get to Brave stacks that include the top of the order with Jock Peterson, Ozzie Albies, Freddie Freeman, Austin Riley. They're all the high-end owned guys. Dansby Swanson is a bat on this team that never gets respect. I think he's a pretty darn good bat at shortstop. 17 home runs on the season, a 211 ISO. He struggles with the triple slash this year, but I think he's in play, particularly on a slate this size at shortstop. And then on the other side, to get back to your question, going up against Smiley here, you've got significant right-handed power in Rhys Hoskins, in JT Realmuto, in Andrew McCutchen. You can get to the lefties in this lineup. Bryce Harper, Didi Gregorius, perfectly competent against a lefty like Drew Smiley. And I wouldn't leave Gene Segura out. I keep mentioning him. He's having a phenomenal season. 312, 366, 446, 5 home runs, 6 stolen bases off the top of this lineup. So very productive up there. He's getting a ton of ownership on the FanDuel slate, though.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just one more thing because I'm still looking through some of the data, and on the Taillon versus Velasquez point, something else that's really going to get me off of Velasquez here is look at some of the data, just comparing these guys as GPP plays. And by the way, I have zero confidence in Taillon in this spot. However, and at FanDuel, I don't think we have to consider him. This is more DraftKings specific because we have to roster 2 starting pitchers. Similar price point, Velasquez 7,700, Taillon 7,400. But Taillon's picking up 8% projected ownership compared to 25% for Velasquez. And if you look at our top pitchers tool, which is free today over at Awesemo.com, Velasquez a 27% chance to be one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate compared to 22% for Jameson Taillon. So, minimal difference in terms of odds of success for the two, but the ownership is more than 3x in favor of Vince Velasquez right now. So with that in mind, the numbers seem to indicate that Jameson Taillon is the stronger GPP play of the two. Zero confidence in it for me, though, but just kind of look at the data. That's something that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, especially on a short slate like this, that's just where we have to make our decision and roll those dice and ride with the uncomfortable pitcher in the not good spot. But you're also talking about he is technically a little bit better in terms of my sequential hitting and run creation metric, which is the walk rate plus barrel rate minus strikeout rate. He comes in after you multiply it by -1 to make it make sense. He comes in at an 8.2, which is not a good mark, right? That means you're pretty targetable for run creation and for sequential hitting. If you look at Vince Velasquez, he comes in at a 1.1 in that metric because he's got a much higher walk rate and he allows a higher barrel rate. So there are good indicators here, predictive indicators that say that Taillon is the slightly better play, even in a vacuum where we're not considering that ownership. So I would be probably looking to that even if you took the ownership off the table.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, for me, it's mostly because of the ownership. Just the matchup kind of scares me a little bit. But yeah, it's also just a product of, hey, it's a 4-game slate with a lot of crappy pitching options. In the next game, one of the potential crappy pitching options, not even totally sure it is. We have Ryan Weathers on the mound for the Padres, on the mound for the Marlins. They've not officially announced the starting pitcher yet. I know that we have Braxton Garrett is listed as the probable starting pitcher on DraftKings, but I haven't seen anything officially to announce that. So first, starting with Ryan Weathers, it's just hard for me to consider him for DFS because he doesn't throw enough pitches. And I get that it's, a pretty good matchup against the Marlins and the pitching options aren't that good today. But the last time we saw Ryan Weathers make a start was against the Rockies on July 11th, and he threw 29 pitches. And, we've seen a lot of outings this year where he's been kind of in that 60 to 70 pitch range. I'd rather take my chance with somebody else who I think could work deeper into the game.
Yeah, totally agreed. And I think especially when you're just riding along on DK with 30% ownership. That's nuts. I don't think he should be on anywhere near that on this slate. I know he's going up against the Marlins and maybe the public is just riding that. But yeah, I'm with you. I would be really concerned that you're getting a 3-4 inning start. The Padres have been treating this kid. They declared at the beginning of the season that they were going to be treating this kid with kid gloves. They've done it all year long. They've had all kinds of problems with their pitching staff. I see no reason that all of a sudden they're going to decide that this kid's getting 6 innings, 7 innings today, and he's going to, you could argue, I guess, maybe given the fact that he's a decent pitching prospect, that he gets through 4 clean and he's worth that for 6,200 on DK, but not with 30% ownership to me. I don't think that makes sense. I don't think it adds up. Over his 58 2/3 on the season, 17.9% strikeout rate. So what are we really even buying if we do that? I don't know. I don't really love it. 43.4% hard hit rate. So you get into a guy that is giving up some contact, giving up some offense, not striking out many guys. So really, you're only walking into the price and the potential to be in a weak matchup against the Marlins. I don't love it.
Yeah, and then on the other side, have you officially seen anything on who's going to start for the Marlins? Because I can't really find anything official. I just see that, DraftKings currently has Braxton Garrett listed as the probable starting pitcher. But it seems like if I look at MLB.com or anywhere else, and even in our data, we don't have a starting pitcher listed for the Marlins right now.
I went with Garrett. When I pull stuff down from Fangraphs, unless I see something that changes in their probables, they're usually pretty good at nailing it. So that's who came down with it. So I kind of just put him in because I need a pitcher for everything else to appear anyway. If it is Braxton Garrett, he costs $4,000 on the DK slate. but I wouldn't expect that we're going to get like a full start. I would imagine that's going to be probably more of a bullpen game, and he would be super targetable if he does get a couple of innings here. In that BBB minus K metric that I gave before, he's at a negative 4.7. So he's extremely targetable for run creation. That said, it's in a 15 2/3 inning sample, so it's a little bit unfair. But in that sample, he walked 11% of hitters, only struck out 13.7, gave up a 38.9% hard hit rate. Just seems like a targetable lefty that we can throw some of these Padres bats at. We know the Padres are a very good offense here. They love to run. They get on base very well. They just create runs. Even when they're not hitting home runs, this team is very good with run creation, and they have just a bunch of guys with pretty solid hit tools. So I like getting to this Padres offense from that sense, pretty much regardless of who's on the mound in this one, honestly. It's not like they're going to pull Max Scherzer out of the pocket.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. Although with that said, even though it's not going to be, an elite bullpen or anything like that, still in general, a lot of times bullpen games are slightly more favorable for the pitching than the offense, just in the fact that, they can mix and match lefties and righties, and just that somebody who's a mediocre reliever is going to be more effective in one inning, than a mediocre starter pitching over the course of, 6 to 7 innings or what it may be. So with that in mind, are the Padres a team that you would like to stack heavily, assuming that this is a bullpen game for the Marlins, and that's still up in the air?
Yeah, so that's a point I was going to actually address with our other game. It's escaping me right now who the later game has an opener as well. Another team going with a bullpen game. But yeah, I think that this is a spot where against the Marlins bullpen, I'd be willing to do it with this team just because they are good hitters. You've got a lot of guys who get on base. Just looking down the OBP from the top of the projected lineup, 352, 371, 355, 357, 380. Those are extreme OBPs, and all of those guys are 20 or better percent better than average creating runs. So it's just a really good offense. They steal bases. There's just a lot of ways to score DFS points here. And on a short slate, I think you need it. And they're not getting crazy owned, particularly on FanDuel. You can get to Cronenworth under 10%, Manny under 10%, Trent Grisham just at 10%, Fernando Tatis in a reasonable place. I actually like this spot despite the bullpen game, but I do agree with you completely that you get those high leverage arms coming out, just throwing gas, not worrying about having to get through more than an inning, maybe 2 innings. That does become a spot where it's like, all right, this isn't exactly a targetable game like bullpen games maybe used to be in the past because you've got so many premium arms in the pen now.
All right, final game on the slate, and I'm not sure we could have anything too unique in terms of analysis here, but Max Scherzer going up against Matt Harvey, Nationals, Orioles. Who do you believe is the better starting pitcher in this game?
Is that like a you or Matt Harvey kind of a question? I think that might be close. If we're comparing the two pitchers who are actually going in this one, obviously no contest. Yeah, I mentioned I've got one guy projecting out nearly double most of the field on this one, and that's Max Scherzer going up against this Orioles team. I really like the spot for Max. 35.1% strikeout rate on the season for Max compared to a 16.2 for the other guy on the other side of this game. Max is yielding a 34.6% hard hit rate. Matt Harvey is giving up a 39.5. Max is yielding more barrels, though, 11.7% barrel ball rate compared to Harvey's 7.8. But overall, yeah, there's no comparison here whatsoever. Max has a 3.37 xFIP, a 0.89 whip, inducing 16.4% swinging strikes. He's actually inducing double the swinging strikes that Harvey is. Harvey's at 8.3, so a little bit under double, but that's fantastic. Harvey's also putting way too many guys on base, a 1.68 whip. He's obviously super targetable. He does scrape just barely into positive numbers in the BBB minus K. He's at 1.5, but obviously a guy you can throw some of these Nationals bats at. That said, they're getting a ton of ownership because the public likes to target this pitcher. So I don't know how you roster them in any kind of a unique configuration. On DK, everybody's over 20%. On FanDuel, most of these hitters are over 20%, except for the back end of the lineup. So it's just difficult to stack them.
Yeah, so one thing that I think we have to talk about when it comes with Max Scherzer, though, is, dumb comments from me aside about who's better, Max Scherzer or Matt Harvey. How much Max Scherzer do you want to get to on this slate? Because in the initial build that I did coming into the show, I actually ended up with Max Scherzer in all my lineups on DraftKings, and I think that kind of is going to be the case for me at FanDuel as well, just because he's so much better than every other pitcher we have available to us.
Yeah, I mean, if I was crunching for this slate, I think I would honestly let Max fly, and then I would leave like Eovaldi and some Tyon shares in, and I'm talking about FanDuel. And probably just take everybody out and be totally fine if I had just 100% Max. That said, this is also not the kind of slate that I like at all and probably won't be playing. So it's just, I just think it's a nonsensical slate. You're getting Max 79% ownership share on DK, 50% on FanDuel. It makes sense from that perspective to pivot and get some shares of some of these other guys that we've talked about. He is so much more likely to put up the best start of the day, though. I guess maybe if you're going to own him that heavily, put some Orioles hedge stacks into your life in some of those other shares where you are getting to some of those other pitchers, and just, maybe cross your fingers. But yeah, I mean, he is clearly the apex talent on this slate by far. So I'd be comfortable taking as much of him as I got, to be honest, and just saying like, all right, I'm going to win it elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's actually also when I built the initial lineups, it wasn't really with really the context of the slate in mind. It's kind of just run the line, seeing like, all right, let's see what comes up in Fantasy Cruncher, and then as we get more ownership updates later, I kind of see what it is that I'd like to update. And I think that I would still probably end up with Max Scherzer like 95%, and then make like 5% Orioles stacks just as a hedge. We only have projected for like 2 to 3% ownership right now, so that's probably the way that I would actually go about playing this slate when I end up entering my lineups. But by far, Max Scherzer is going to be my highest rostered player on the slate and is going to be in almost all of my lineups. Maybe I just make a couple of Orioles lineups just because they're not going to pick up any ownership and it's a small slate. But yeah, in general, it's a spot that he's by far the preeminent talent and best fantasy player on the slate. But any other overarching thoughts for the early slate before we jump into the main slate?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to round that point off a little bit even more, it's also the kind of slate where all of these other guys are basically gas cans and targetable for a lot of offense. So he doesn't even need to go out and put up a 70-point Max Scherzer kind of a FanDuel start today to be the best pitcher, despite the heavy price tag, despite the heavy ownership. He only really needs to go out and give you probably a decent start here if none of these other guys, unless one of these other guys throws a 10 strikeout, no hitter or something like that, which is very much off the table in terms of expectation. I think it's just clear that he's going to be the best pitcher, even if he doesn't have an extreme upside kind of a Scherzer game. So yeah, it just makes sense to ride with him.
So one more question I'm going to ask you about DraftKings. Is this a slate where to make a really contrarian build? I don't think it's really necessary to do this on FanDuel with the way that it sets up there, but for DraftKings, could you see a reason where we have to roster 2 starting pitchers? Is there a route where potentially the Orioles end up being one of the higher scoring teams on the slate, but Max Scherzer is still one of the top scoring pitchers? So maybe build a really crazy lineup or maybe willing to make an Orioles stack that also includes Scherzer.
It's not the craziest idea on this slate. That's never something that I really like to do. But given that we've only got 4 games, and given that, there is the possibility, like maybe these guys do put, 3 runs on Max and then end up scoring a couple runs off the bullpen and have an impressive game, but he still has that 10 strikeout game, or even just has, the 7 strikeout game that I was talking about, but nobody else comes close to that. I think that actually does make some sense. What would you be looking at? All these guys are so low owned. Is there a specific core that you had in mind of these guys that, I hate not getting Santander in this lineup, but like, Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes, Trey Mancini, Ryan Mountcastle is a pretty good foreman that's not going to be owned. Is that basically where you'd be focused?
It would still just be the best hitters, right? Like there's no point where it's like, oh my God, now I have to get like super creative and also play with the bottom of the order. I'd just be playing. Yeah. Like I'd just be playing the core guys, Mancini, Mountcastle, Mullins, just because at that point it's a lot, literally nobody else is going to, not nobody, but almost nobody's going to have that lineup. So might as well play a core, but actually I think I'm going to build one lineup like that for this, just because I don't think I've ever done that this season. Maybe in the past there's been times where I've done it once or twice, not one that comes to mind though, but this is one of the only slates where I see that it makes sense that could happen. I mean, the Orioles, we do still have them with a 6% chance to be a top stack on for the day, and Scherzer's so much better than everybody else. Like it's not out of the realm of possibility that Scherzer scores 14 DraftKings points today, and that's enough for him to be like the highest or second highest scoring pitcher on the slate. So, he could go out and pitch 6 innings, give up 5 runs and strike out 8 guys. And that just might be enough for him to be a top scoring pitcher and for the Orioles to do some damage. So yeah, it's just kind of a weird build that I'm considering. Not that I'm saying people should go build 150 lineups of that, but just in the interest of getting creative on a 4-game slate. But
that's a good approach. I like it.
Let's jump into the main slate now. I'm changing over all my data here for the main slate and also pulling this up on the site, all the tools. But the first game we have here is going to be the Detroit Tigers against the Kansas City Royals. Casey Mize on the mound for Detroit, Carlos Hernandez on the mound for KC. Now we've seen as of late, the field is really heavy on the Detroit Tigers. The Tigers had a really good stretch over the last month and a half. And for a lot of the stretch, they were basically going unowned. I don't think it's going to continue going forward. But now all of a sudden the field is all over Detroit. So we have Detroit, one of the most popular stacks on the slate last night, also one of the most popular stacks on the slate today. I get it's a easy matchup. I get the Tigers offense is maybe a little bit better now than we thought coming into the season, but there's no way I want to play a Tigers offense that's this popular. They're one of the most negatively leveraged teams on the slate.
100% with you. Yeah, I don't need any of these Tigers at this kind of ownership. If they were way low owned and sneaky, I might be interested, but I do not think this is a good team. I do not think this is a good roster. Yeah, they've been better. They've created some runs recently. I get that, but it's just overall just not a good offense. They're still, even with their turnaround, they're still sitting second worst in baseball, 26.3% strikeout rate against righties, below average with a 3.43% home run rate, below average with a 155 collective ISO, below average creating runs, 6% behind the average by collective WRC plus against righties. It's just not a good offense. Carlos Hernandez, not a good pitcher, 25.2 innings, 30.5% strikeout rate actually is pretty good, but a 14.4% walk rate, allowing 7.9% barrel rate and a 42.9% hard hit rate. That makes him pretty targetable. That said, I just don't trust this offense, and I never like getting to it when the public is there. I only want to get to these guys when they're sneaky in a decent spot that the public isn't paying attention to. You get nice value, but it's not, if you're riding along with the public, it's just not going to be worth it, I don't think.
Yeah, so here's the spots where I've played the Tigers this year, and it hasn't been all that frequently, clearly not enough over the last 6 weeks because they've played, extremely well over that stretch. The spots where I have targeted the Tigers have been number one, they project for like 1 to 2% ownership and maybe going up against a chalky pitcher. Number two is a spot where there's just a whole bunch of pitchers to pay up for, and the offense is really cheap and inexpensive. So it's like, all right, I put myself on a totally different lineup build. I've gotten, 2 stud pitchers in my lineup. I've got this cheap stack that maybe has a little bit of leverage. That's been the spot where I've liked to go to the Tigers. But now we just have the field going to them so heavily every single night at this point. We have them projected for a 16% ownership share as a team on DraftKings. We also have them at 8.8% chance to be a top stack. So they have the second best stack odds of anybody on the slate, but the leverage is so negative because the field is in there in such a heavy way. They simply don't have a nearly 20% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate. FanDuel, they're a little more reasonable, where they only have a 10% ownership share. But even with that in mind, it's still an over-owned team. I think the Tigers are going to regress going forward. So it's just not a spot that I really want to be on. But on the other side of the game, Casey Mize going up against the Kansas City Royals. What do you make of this matchup and the Royals offense, which is also fairly popular?
Yeah, it's another pretty targetable pitcher. I think on talent, Mize is probably the better talent, but over 99 in the third innings, he hasn't really proven it. 19.8% strikeout rate, allowing a 40.4% hard hit, 9.1% barrel ball rate. The 88.9 mile an hour average exit velo is okay, but he's walking 6.8% of hitters. 111 whip is all right. Doesn't induce or throw enough strikes. 9.7% swinging strike, 26.7% CSW. Just not working in the zone enough. Down to a 3.9 in that BBB minus K. So a little bit targetable for some sequential hitting and for some run creation here. I like the offense on the other side of this one. I like their ownership numbers on the DK slate. They're getting a little bit more attention on FanDuel, I think, for pricing. Top 3 hitters on DK, 5,500, 5,100, 5,500. Top 3 hitters on FanDuel, 3,400, 2,900, 3,100. It's just completely backwards over there. So they're getting attention on the blue side. But I do like Andrew Benintendi cleaning up in that lineup if he's in that spot, drawing a little bit less ownership than his peers. Is 2,800 on the FanDuel slate, not drawing much attention at all on DK. So I think they're a better DraftKings play, but I think I can get to some Royal stacks and build them a little bit differently than maybe some other people are. Like I have no problem putting Jorge Soler into my Royal stack despite his immense struggles. 185, 282, 331 on the season with just 9 home runs and a 146 OPS or ISO rather. That's a guy who hit 48 home runs 2 seasons ago. So I do still think the power's there. I don't think it's totally left. So you can put these guys together in decent enough ways, under-owned enough ways that you can get to Royal stacks here, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting how we've just seen these teams kind of inverse FanDuel versus DraftKings, whereas, the Tigers look about appropriately owned on FanDuel, way over-owned on DraftKings, and then vice versa, where the Royals look, about appropriately owned on DraftKings and just way over-owned on FanDuel. So that's also something else to just keep in mind, which site you're playing on, because that will make the teams look a little bit different in terms of what their ownership is. Guys, don't forget, today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. By the way, also, I just said don't forget, and I realized I didn't do the ad read earlier. So, like, how'd you forget? I never told you. Today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you guys are new to PrizePicks, head on over to PrizePicks.com. Use the promo code Awesemo. You can get a $100 bonus on the first deposit you put down. And PrizePicks, if you guys are new there, prop-based contests. So, and by the way, prop-based contests for everything. I always like to head on over to PrizePicks when I'm doing the read and then just see what are the sports they've added, because there's always something new that's up there. They've got stuff up here for the Olympics right now. This is Olympics basketball, Olympics volleyball. So, hey, if you're somebody who played volleyball in college, in high school, maybe you really like volleyball, and you go over and you know how many kills April Ross is going to have in volleyball this week. Listen, you could put that in. You could parlay this with other volleyball props. We've also got Call of Duty. There's disc golf up here now. There's CSGO. There's Big Three basketball. There's Highlight. They've got everything over at PrizePicks. So that is something. Go check out, and you could build all kinds of crazy parlays here. But first thing,
parlay kills in Call of Duty with kills in volleyball.
Yeah, I didn't even know you could kill people in volleyball, but I guess I played the rules wrong in high school. I just hit it. But I guess that was not the way to go about it. But yeah, head on over to PrizePicks, guys, especially if you're interested in getting some action on the Olympics. They have absolutely everything up there, and it is a fun site to check out. That is promo code Awesemo. If you're making your first deposit, use that promo code and get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. Next game that we have here on the slate, the St. Louis Cardinals against the Cincinnati Reds. And I want to start by asking about Luis Castillo, because he was formerly, one of the best young up-and-coming pitchers in baseball. He's pitched a little bit better as of late, but on the whole, it's been a very disappointing season. Something funny about this, do you remember prior to the season, there's a rumor that the Yankees and the Reds were potentially going to swap Luis Castillo for Gleyber Torres, and it was kind of the Reds thought that Torres wasn't enough of a package. The Yankees didn't want to give up Torres, and now both of them, it's like, what do either of them have in terms of value now? So just kind of funny how that shook out. But what do you make of Luis Castillo as a pitcher now? And do you think this is a spot he could find some success in?
Yeah, I do still trust him. I have rolled him out tentatively in spots recently. He's still been in my weekly lineup. He's in that dynasty league I talk about all the time. He's one of my mainstays over there. So he's still projecting fairly well. And I actually like the fact that he's priced down now, and maybe people are a little bit hesitant to roster him. 7,500 and only 15% ownership on DK is pretty interesting to me for Luis Castillo. He's projecting well enough. He's up to a 21.9% strikeout rate. It's gradually creeping up. He's at a 10.1% walk rate, which is very inflated and not good. 1.41 whip, just putting way too many guys on base. He still induces a 12.6% swinging strike rate. He's still at a 3.95 xFIP. So under the covers, he's been a little bit better. He only allows a 4.7% barrel ball rate, a 5.9 degree average launch angle, 88 miles an hour of average exit velo, and a 38.4% hard hit rate. So guys do hit the ball a little bit hard, but not to egregious degrees that are over 40% like we've seen with some of these other guys. And they're hitting it a lot into the ground or on a line toward fielders. So he got BABIP to death a little bit earlier in the season. So there was some luck, some happenstance that was baked into that. I think he's a better pitcher than we've seen this season. I think he's much closer to the guy that we've seen in previous years. So I'm happy to trust him here. I can attack this Cards lineup. There are at least a few heavy strikeout guys in the lineup. Overall, it's a 20.1% strikeout rate on the average for this lineup. But that's helped by Tommy Edman, who's at 12.8%, Harrison Bader at 16, Yadi Molina at 17 if he's in the lineup, and Arenado, the lone star in that grouping, at 13. A lot of their other premium hitters, like Tyler O'Neill, 31%, Carlson, 24.6%. There are some strikeouts in that lineup. And depending on what version of the lineup we could get a few bonus ones. It's not the easiest lineup in terms of strikeouts, but they've also been a little bit underperforming on the season in terms of their run creation. 13% behind the average in run creation against righties. Only a 3.34% home run rate is below average, and a 151 team ISO is well below average. So against righties, the Cards have struggled with everything except for avoiding the strikeouts. 22.1% strikeout rate against righties for the active roster on the season. I think it's at least a relatively clean spot for Castillo, where he gives us 6 decent innings and maybe gets a few bonus strikeouts. So I think he's playable.
And by the way, some of the Luis Castillo data we have in our top pitcher store over at Awesemo.com, which is free to use today. So go check that out, guys. We do have him only with an 8.4% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate, fairly low owned to 15%. But one thing that I think kind of dings him for this slate is there are just so many quality pitching options to go to. We've got Carlos Rodon tonight, Corbin Burns, Kevin Gausman, Jose Barrios, Chris Bassett. So, I look at Luis Castillo. I think he's viable. I just don't know how much I'm going to get to him today just because there's so many strong pitchers to roster on this slate.
Sure. And that makes some sense. I'm just, let me jump over to my window here where I can see everybody together in terms of the slate. I have, I'm going to say 5, 6. It looks like 6 pitchers at least projected above him, and then a couple guys like right with him. So he doesn't stand out. It's not like he's at the top of my board. He's just kind of at a playable number where I think maybe we're, probably not a little bit low considering the other high-end options. So the 8% is probably about right. But considering he's going only 4.8% owned on the FanDuel slate, I think I can get there and maybe just roll the dice with him. If his ownership goes up to a more level area on the as we get toward lock for this slate that's much later in the day, it's an easy point to jump off of. But I think there is enough on the bone here for him to have a pretty decent start. And I really like the DK price.
All right. And then on the other side, listen, Jake Watford is no good. This is an excellent spot for the Reds. They are picking up an incredibly high amount of ownership right now. So we currently have the Reds as the most negatively leveraged stack team on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Most popular stack of the day on FanDuel, 18% projected ownership as a stack compared to 8.6% chance to be a top stack. Over on DraftKings, even more negative leverage going there with Cincinnati. We have them picking up nearly 20% projected ownership with an 8% chance to be a top stack. So look, if you're playing cash games, sure, go play Reds hitters. But if this ownership holds, I would have 0% Red stacks. This is way too much ownership for a team that, while is in a good spot, they just don't nearly have as good of odds being a top stack as what the current ownership suggests. So to me, if these numbers were to hold, Cincinnati would be a team I would not be making stacks of.
Yeah, it's a shame. I wish we could sit here and lie to the public and tell them to get off this stack so that I could play it, because I really like the spot. I really like the fact that they're underpriced for how they've been performing all season long. There's not a single hitter in the DraftKings projected lineup that's over 5,000, which is nuts. Some of these guys have been really, really good this season. I really like the 2,400 price and 2,200 on FanDuel on Aristides Aquino if he's cleaning up, or honestly, wherever he is in this lineup. I like the home run upside in that kid. Tons of strikeouts, but there's definitely power in that bat. It's just that they're super, super heavy owned. So if you see it come down, jump on it. If you see a guy, maybe Joey Votto stands out as a one-off, only 11% ownership on DK, significantly higher on FanDuel, so he's not really usable over there. But maybe you grab a Joey Votto if you need a first baseman one-off for 4,700, where you're getting to a premium bat that's probably a little underpriced. But even he, 11% ownership, it's not like you're getting away from a huge, huge amount of the field. So I don't love it. I really wish I could play it, but yeah, they're too owned.
Yeah, and this is one of these spots. I mean, it's even a spot like, listen, with the Nationals yesterday, for example, it was a great spot on paper against the Nationals. But then we get to lock, and it's a team that's picking up, 20-ish% ownership, and their odds of being a top stack are just not nearly reflecting what their ownership is. So those are spots I fade the team, and then you just cross your fingers and you say, like, all right, anybody go off but this team. This team could score 5-6 runs. No big deal. Just don't be the team that scores 1,000,000 runs. And you're going to be okay if you're playing, 150 lineups over the course of time in large field tournaments. These are the spots where I just think it makes sense to be off of in the long term, where they're just this over-owned. If you're playing these kinds of teams every day, it's just really difficult to come out ahead over the course of time because just the negative leverage there. So we'll see where the ownership ends up coming with Cincinnati later in the day. Also, all the more reason, guys, like this YouTube video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because later on in the day, we do have the MLB Deeper Dive coming up, MLB Live Before Lock, and we'll have, much better idea of what all the ownership is going to be. Right now, we have, somewhat of an idea, but those numbers become a little bit more clear as we get closer to lock. And then also, as I said at the top of the show, if you guys are just joining in now, leave a comment below on the YouTube video, and I'm going to try to circle back later in the day and answer some of the questions we get in the comments section later, because really trying to build a little community feel there and build up some more engagement. So I think that's going to be a good way to do it. Also, leave me some comments. Some of you like that idea, if you don't like that idea, and we're always trying to change the shows and add new elements to them. Next game we have on the slate, it is Kyle Gibson starting for the Texas Rangers against Framber Valdez. And it's funny, because I was placing some Cy Young bets, and I was kind of doing it through Twitter also, where when I was placing my my bets on AL Cy Young, when it looked like Garrett Cole was starting to regress, and I said that, hey, I thought that Carlos Rodon at longer odds looked like a good value at the time. I thought Lance Lynn looked like a good value. And a bunch of people were saying to me, hey, those guys are not the people who you should be looking at as a fate of Garrett Cole. They're saying Kyle Gibson was going to be the guy. And listen, realistically, he was pitching well at the time, but boy, has it gone south ever since then. I was just looking back at some of those tweets then, and Kyle Gibson has just had a number of poor starts in a row. So Kyle Gibson did get off to a great start this year. He has no track record of this kind of level of success, but the underlying numbers all look solid. But now it looks like he's starting to regress and become the guy that he actually is. So I don't have interest in him here, but are the Houston Astros a team that you were looking to stack against Gibson?
Well, that's a great barometer for the value of an opinion from Twitter. Yeah, it's the other thing Kyle Gibson is not as a Cy Young Award contender. Yeah, I think I could throw some stacks at Gibson here. I wish he was getting some of that public ownership. I wish that people were still on that kind of idea of this guy being a really good pitcher and maybe, rostering him even up to like 10% so that I could attack a piece of the field by rostering Astros bats. We're not getting that here, but I think it is a decent opportunity for a team that I always like to roster when they're under-owned. I'm happy to get to a very, very good offense against most pitchers, unless it's one of these apex, I would throw like Scherzer, Rodon kind of a guy in there. Unless it's somebody at that kind of a level, I'm going to take these Astros when they're under-owned. It's such a lineup filled with professional hitters, some very, very good power hitters on this team, and they're all coming in under 10% owned on the DK slate because they're pricey in part, largely under 10% on the FanDuel slate where they're relatively inexpensive somehow. Yuli Gurriel, 2,700. What the hell is FanDuel doing? Yeah, it's a team that I can definitely stack up against Kyle Gibson. He on the season, despite even through his good period of the season, he's only at a 20.8% strikeout rate. He's still walking 7.6% of hitters. So it's not like he's been completely suppressing offense through sitting guys down like crazy. He allows a 3.9% barrel ball rate, which is very good. Limits the hard hit to 38.7%, 88 mile an hour average exit velo. I think these Astros overcome that and put a number on Gibson here.
Yeah, and then by the way, also because somebody brought up in YouTube chat, why did I skip over the Rays Indians game? I'm just looking online. I didn't have a starting pitcher listed for the Rays, so just while Terry's been talking, I've been circling back to see if I could find who that is online, and then. Okay, so bullpen game for the most part.
That's the one I was trying to think of earlier.
Yeah, so we'll hit that one next. But then just hit on Framber Valdez going up against the Rangers, because Valdez I do think is one of the overall best pitching options on the night slate, at least from an ownership perspective. I'd much rather pay up for Corbin Burnes and Carlos Rodon overall. But as a pivot to these guys, Framber Valdez comes at a little bit of reduced ownership. Also, the price is a little bit cheaper. So Valdez in particular on FanDuel at only 8,200. I think that he's somebody good to look at here, is maybe going a little bit overlooked by the field, because to me, I think Valdez has established himself as one of the better young pitchers in baseball. I don't know if you read that Fangraphs did their top 50 trade value players article last week, and Valdez was near the top. I think he was somewhere around the 20 range or something like that. Young, cost-controlled player, 3.26 ERA, 3.52 expected ERA. I love the matchup against the Rangers. I really like the ownership too. So Valdez, a little bit stronger of FanDuel play than DK, but I like him on both sides.
Yeah, I think he's an excellent play here. I agree. It's a little bit better on the FanDuel site where you're getting him a little bit cheaper. He's definitely too low owned, though, across the board for his price. There are other options on the slate, but like you said, that makes him a great pivot here. What I really love, he maybe lacks a little bit in the strikeout department, 21.4% on the season, maybe walks a few too many guys, 9.2%. But what I love is he only allows a 4.5% barrel ball rate, and he has a negative 6.5 degree average launch angle. That means guys hit the ball into the ground. Last I saw, and it was true, the last time I said it, it was true that I hadn't seen it, and it was still over 70%. I think his ground ball rate's still over 70% on the season. If it dropped to like 68%, that's still fantastic. It really caps the power on the other side. Even Joey Gallo is under a 10 in my home run model, and several points under a 10 being that average chance of hitting a home run. So I really like the spot for Framber to limit the power. And I think with the extreme strikeout guys in that lineup on the other side, there could be some additional strikeouts hiding in this lineup for him. So I really like Framber here at 8,200. Seems like a very good spot. And 11% ownership on FanDuel, definitely playable. 16% ownership on DK. You pay up a little bit, but you pay up to be a little bit different with him over there. Really like the spot for Framber.
All right. And now that I figured out that it's going to be a bullpen game and Rasmussen's going to be on the mound for the Rays, we could circle back to that game. But first, guys, if you want access to all of the tools and all the information that Terry and I are talking about right now, you could sign up for an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. That'll include information for every single DFS sport that's out there right now, although for the most part, that's going to be baseball right now. That is the predominant sport. We also have MMA right now. We have NASCAR. We have golf. But if you just want an MLB weekly package, that is $15.95. But if you do want the Awesemo Plus package, that's going to cover all sports for a weekly package, you could use the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That is one word, all capital letters. That will get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. Stop guessing, start winning, join Awesemo Plus today. All right, now we could hit on the Rays Indians game. It is going to be JC Mejia on the mound for Cleveland. Shockingly high run total in this game for a bullpen game for the Rays, because the Rays, it's not like they have a bad bullpen by any means. I'm actually going to look at our betting model because I'm curious to see what it has as the ROI for the under in this game. But walk me through Mejia versus the Rays bullpen, and why do you think the total is so high for this game? It is the highest total of any game on the slate.
I'm curious about that myself because it doesn't really make sense to me in terms of the Rays side of this one, in terms of their bullpen. Like you said, they have an excellent bullpen, and they kind of invented this idea of the opener, and they've been the team that's really done it well, really perfected it. Rolling out Drew Rasmussen, who is a very high-end strikeout guy, 32.3% over his 29 and 2/3 out of the pen so far this season in terms of strikeouts, 12.7% induced swinging strikes, 31.9% CSW, only allows a 5.6% barrel ball rate. The hard hit is extreme, 48.6, but when you bring it in fast, sometimes it goes out fast when guys make contact. So that's where some of that is coming from. He's a high-end arm. I expect him to get maybe 2 innings off the top. And this is the guy, like I said, that I was thinking of, all right, the first time through the batting order, you're going to just take the bat out of the hands of these Indians. I'm not saying that Guardians. I don't want to say that I want to start Drew Rasmussen, although for 4K on DK, maybe that becomes a little bit interesting if he gets 2 innings and picks up, 4 or 5 strikeouts. I don't know that that's going to be the case here. It's not the play for me, but I do think that there's enough here where Tampa is going to be taking the bats out of the hands of these Guardians hitters. Damn it.
No, they're still the Indians. They're not the Guardians
not yet technically, but I'm happy to make the change as soon as possible. I don't necessarily think we should be calling them that other name anymore. The Cleveland team, let's say that.
Yeah, I mean, it just gets confusing because they're still listed. It's still their name listed on FanDuel, DraftKings.
I don't want to confuse anybody out there. I'll just say Cleveland.
Yeah, I think Cleveland's probably Cleveland. I think works. By the way, also because I just looked it up. So in our sports betting model, which is free right now on Awesemo.com, we have a 3.1% ROI betting the under for this game. However, that is assuming with the run total is at 10 and it's juiced towards the under. The line at a bunch of sports books is 10.5. So if you could find a book, one of the ones that we play DFS on that we talk about a lot during the show, they have 10.5 as the over under for this game, and I'm going to bet that right now because I think that is an incorrect line. That is a very high total for this game, and yeah, I agree with everything you're saying there too about the Rays going up against Cleveland here. Cleveland doesn't have a great offense. The Rays have a pretty good bullpen. I'm certainly not dying to stack Cleveland in this spot. We have them a 5.2% chance to be a top stack. So yeah, I think this is a spot that's overall just getting overvalued by the books. But on the other end, maybe there is a little bit of cause for concern because I don't think JC Mejia is particularly great. And the Rays individually do look like one of the best stacks to get to today.
Yeah, I think Mejia is at least targetable on this slate. He's not impressing anybody. 23.2% strikeout rate, 8.6% walk rate, too many walks, 44.6% hard hit rate. A little bit of an ouch there. 6.9% barrel ball rates. 3.93 xFIP is a surprising number to see considering all those other marks. 144 whip. He's just putting too many guys on base, not inducing enough swinging strikes. So I think he's targetable with these premium Rays bats. Hitting Nelson Cruz to this lineup is just ridiculous. I hate that it's in my division. I love Nelson Cruz as a hitter. I actually like what the Rays do just in general, team building and the way they go about constructing their lineup. But God, my Yankees didn't need Nelson Cruz to join this lineup. I think they're phenomenal for stacks. They're getting a little bit popular. You can get to Randy Arozarena, who's not that popular on this slate. He's kind of stands out as maybe You go to him as a one-off. It's righty, but who really cares? He's got a ton of power. 13 home runs on the season. He's maybe disappointed in terms of the people that thought he was going to be that guy that we saw in the playoffs last year, just hitting everything out of the park. But a decent season, 13 home runs, 11 stolen bases. So for DFS, that's productive. Still creating runs 12% ahead of the average. Basically, everyone in this lineup, with the exception of Wander Franco, who everyone does think is going to be a superstar, and Kevin Kiermaier, who nobody really cares what Kevin Kiermaier does with the stick as long as he's playing good outfield. Everyone else creates runs well above average in this lineup. So you can put them together in basically any way that you want and just maybe dance in and out of the ownership. That's easier to do on DK. They're a little bit more expensive over there, but you get much lower ownership marks. So it's easier to thread them together in interesting ways on the DraftKings slate. But yeah, I think the Rays are very much in play here.
Yeah, and they're also a different team, FanDuel versus DraftKings, because we do have them being over-owned on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, they actually are one of the more positively leveraged stacks on the slate. So once again, that's something that's going to probably change a little bit as the day goes on. And I wouldn't be surprised also if as that total drops, which I think it's going to be bet down in part because I just bet it. And then I assume that other people are going to be doing that also. That's just something that's going to be reducing potentially the ownership share if the run total drops during the day, because it does look a little bit too high for me. So we'll see how that moves during the day. And go ahead.
I agree. That Rays bullpen, just to put some numbers on it, I was looking up the bullpen stats. Best in the league by xFIP, 3.78 xFIP, 3.46 Sierra on the season, 7th best in baseball with a collective 26.7% strikeout rate. 7.9% walk rate is the best bullpen mark in baseball for walk rate. They're an excellent bullpen. So I really don't know where that run line comes from. That'll drop by at least a half, probably a full run during the course of the day.
Yeah, so we'll see where that comes. We'll see where that comes about. But as of right now, of everything that we have seen from a sports betting angle, under 10.5 currently available at one sports book. That is my favorite bet of the day as of now. Next game that we have here to talk about, the Toronto Blue Jays at the New York Mets. It is Hyun-Jin Ryu on the mound for Toronto and a struggling Taijuan Walker on the mound for the Mets. So Walker got off to a great start this year, kind of come unraveled recently, especially that last time he was out against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Did you see that play where there was the ground ball kind of up the third baseline and he was trying to knock it foul, but it was already in play and he just kind of threw it away? So it was like, it was a soft hit ground ball. The Pirates had the bases loaded. It was basically a ball that was rolling foul, but he hit it while it was still in play and he just knocked it away. So it was basically an infield single that 3 runs scored on.
Smooth. It was one of those just dribblers where if he had stood there and watched it and it was just roll foul. Yeah, that's a great play. I missed that one. But yeah, I had a lot of Taijuan in that game. I thought that was a pretty good spot for him. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't necessarily know that I want to throw him into this buzzsaw of a Blue Jays offense. I didn't really trust the breakout anyway. I didn't think he's always been an okay kind of a pitcher, and he was having a decent season. 90 and a third innings, 24.3% strikeout rate on the season, inducing 9% swinging strikes and 29.3% CSW, allowing 39.6% hard hit, 6.7% barrel ball rate. A lot of this falls right around the league average. He was walking 9.3% of hitters, which is a little bit above. So yeah, under the covers, maybe it was a little bit less shiny than it was on the back of the baseball card the first part of the season anyway. He doesn't project great for me. I just love this Blue Jays offense, so I would much rather go to them. They're not drawing any kind of attention. They're priced up a little bit. At least some of the premium hitters like Vlad is 4,500 on the FanDuel slate. His price isn't popping up on DK, but many of these hitters well over 5,000 on the DK slate. So it's keeping some of the public ownership off. Maybe Taijuan's reputation that he's having a breakout season is keeping a little bit more of the ownership off. I can happily get to some of these Blue Jays bats against Taijuan Walker here.
The Blue Jays are my favorite contrarian stack on the slate. And for the whole, Taijuan Walker's had a solid year, but he's absolutely headed for regression. He has the 2.99 ERA, but a 4.06 expected ERA. He's been buoyed by 261 BABIP. That's going to regress a little bit. Also, he has a career low home run to fly ball rate. That's going to regress a little bit. And it's already started. If you look at his last, few starts now at this point, last time that was obviously horrendous in the plus matchup against, by the way, 2 starts in a row against the Pirates, and neither of them have gone particularly well. He has a total in his last 2 starts of 2 strikeouts to 7 walks, 2 games against Pittsburgh. So I don't know exactly what the true talent of Taijuan Walker is going forward, but I think his ERA is going to be worse going forward than it was earlier in the season. And the other thing to consider also is that the Blue Jays have a really good offense. There's no ownership going here. I'd rather be ahead of Walker regressing than behind at this point. So I think this is a really good spot to say, like, hey, the Blue Jays are only picking up 1.5% ownership as a team. Give me like 6-7% where I'm, way over the field on them, because I think they have a pretty good chance of going off if Walker's regressing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting ahead of the curve on that play, getting out ahead of a lot of the ownership. And it's another team that they could be up against somebody I think is a better pitcher than Taijuan Walker here. And I would still go to them with this kind of ownership. I just really like this Blue Jays lineup. From Marcus Semien through Kevin Biggio at worst in the 7 spot, you can play this lineup and stack them all together. Reese McGuire, if you need a catcher on the DK slate, hey, why not? He's fine to work in there. Not getting any ownership, only costs $3,000. The one thing about it is you do lose the DH out of this lineup. I think they're good enough that it doesn't really matter. We don't really need to sweat that much.
Yeah, and it's once again, it's just an ownership play. It doesn't equate. It doesn't equal what their actual odds are being a top stack. It's so low for such a good offense. So that's always a good spot where I think it makes sense to pay up a little bit to be contrarian. But on the other side here, we have Hyun-Jin Ryu on the mound for Toronto going up against the Mets. Ryu got off to a little bit of a slow start this year, but kind of the inverse of Taijuan Walker. I think Ryu is the better pitcher of the two, but Ryu struggled a little bit in the early going, and now he looks like a guy who's regaining his form and has pitched really well as of late. I don't think that this is necessarily a spot where we have to get to him, just because there are so many good pitching options on the slate, and he's, fairly expensive today. 9,500 on FanDuel. On DK, we have Ryu at 8,400. So I don't really want to get to him, although there are spots that I've liked Ryu, but I'm not looking to stack the Mets against him either.
Yeah, I think I basically come down around that. He is projecting out pretty well for me. It might be his highest projection that I remember my model coming up with on the season for him. I'm just looking into why that might be. Mets lineup, 23.8% strikeout rate against lefties, puts them around the middle of the league. They are below average in terms of run creation at 99 WRC plus, so 1% below average. Around the league average with a 3.76% home run rate in the split. 149 team ISO is well below average. So it's more of a maybe he doesn't get tattooed kind of a spot. Maybe he suppresses their offense enough kind of a spot where this one plays just to like a 5-4 ball game. It isn't all that interesting for DFS unless the Blue Jays get to Taijuan Walker. I just don't see an extreme path to upside for the Mets here. I do get a nice little home run mark around Pete Alonso. He's not drawing any ownership again. So if you want to go home run hunting, maybe grab some Pete Alonso one-offs. I never mind stacking this Mets lineup, but some of the premium hitters are left-handed. When you talk about Michael Conforto, when you talk about Brandon Nimmo in the projected lineup, so Dom Smith is well in there. So it's not a team that I love to attack lefties with. I don't think I would be stacking, but I don't know how much of Hyun-Jin Ryu I need, despite his good projection in my model here. I'm gonna have to look into that one through the day. I'm on the later show, so check back and see what I found out.
Yeah, and are you on the deeper dive? Or are you on live before lock with me?
Deeper dive.
Okay.
Not on the deeper dive.
Yeah, I think I'm doing all right. I'm doing live before lock. Looks like with Gundacker later, but either way, hey, more content from Terry and I coming up later. So like this video, also subscribe, and you guys could see when Terry and I go live later, because there's going to be more stuff to talk about. We're going to have the actual lineups that are going to come out by that point. We're going to know which players we're actually targeting, going to have in our lineups. And right now, just kind of the basis of what we're looking at before we get really all the lineups and make our final decisions. Next game,
caffeinated.
Yeah, yeah. Terry will have more time to be awake by then. Next game here on the slate, the Los Angeles Angels against the Minnesota Twins. Jose Barrios on the mound for Minnesota. Patrick Sandoval on the mound for Los Angeles. So one thing that's kind of interesting about these spots, number one, the Angels lineup was absolutely miserable yesterday. They had no Ohtani in the lineup. Rendon has been out. So they had, Phil Gosselin was batting second. It was just an entire lineup, basically replacement level players. So I'm interested to see who they're going to have in the lineup. On the flip side, the Twins lineup is going to be no good either. They don't have Nelson Cruz anymore. So this is a spot that I think could maybe be another spot where, depending what the lineups look like, maybe a look at the under 9 runs on the sports betting total. Maybe that is something that also change later on in the day when the lineups come out. But there's a chance there's going to be two pretty awful lineups on the mound. So two awful lineups in this game. So I'm not going to be looking to stack either of the offenses, but are you looking to roster either of the pitchers?
I might, depending on what ends up in that Angels lineup, I might get to some shares of Jose Barrios. He projects well enough. He's at 8,400 on the FanDuel slate. 26.3% strikeout rate on the season, doesn't put too many guys on base with a 1.08 whip, induces 10.3% swinging strikes, allows a little bit of premium contact with a 8.9% barrel ball rate, but is okay with the hard hit, 37.3%. 114 and 2/3 innings in 19 starts. So he gives you relatively reliable depth. If it's a weakened version of that Angels lineup, I certainly think there's upside for him. A lot of strikeouts in even the good version of that lineup, honestly. Even Ohtani strikes out at a 30% rate. Jared Walsh, 27.9%, Upton, 28%. So a ton of strikeouts outside of David Fletcher in that lineup for him. So I think I could get to some shares of Berrios, and he's going completely unowned for those prices. So I really like that. I don't think I need any Sandoval. The Twins are going from a team that was incredible offense against left-handed pitching to now they're getting toward a pretty left-handed kind of a lineup. So it's another one where I'll be curious to see what's in the lineup specifically. Like if we get Trevor Larnach and Max in there lefty-lefty, those are guys that not necessarily going to be the greatest performers lefty-lefty. Luis Arias is fine for his hit tool lefty-lefty, but he's not going to give you any power against any hand. Even if it was me pitching underhand, I don't know how much power he'd give you. So I just don't really love the idea of the Twins lineup, but I'm not getting a great projection on Sandoval. He's a decent pitcher, 26.2% strikeout rate, but he puts too many guys on base, 9.6% walk rate, 1.22 whip on the season. I just worry that if he puts a few guys on base in front of the wrong hitter, one of these guys goes deep on him. Josh Donaldson comes to mind. So it's not a great spot in my mind. 16% induced swinging strike rate and a 31.2% CSW do back up his strikeout numbers. And there are some decent strikeout spots in the Twins lineup as well. I wouldn't be shocked if Sandoval has a good start here. It's just not a spot for me DFS-wise, I don't think.
Yeah, and I do assume that we're going to have Shohei Ohtani back in the lineup for the Angels, but in all likelihood, Rendon, he's injured right now, so he probably won't be in the lineup, but it's definitely a reduced lineup right now. And it's crazy. The Angels have Shohei Ohtani, Mike Trout on the same team. I haven't read it. When is Trout coming back? I mean, I know I saw a video that he was running bases the other day, but that'll be a really fun lineup now that we have, Ohtani's established as a star, Trout out there. It just sucks that they have no other talent around them whatsoever. I mean, I like Rendon as a player, but he's hardly ever on the field as of late either. Yeah. But that could be a really fun team to watch, but just hasn't come together quite yet.
With Marshall, they'll be interesting too. He's a decent premium prospect in that like 15, 20 home runs and 15 stolen bases kind of a range. So if he can get it going, he adds another interesting piece to their offense. And I think they'll be very interesting once they get Trout and Rendon back for DFS purposes, because now you've got a lot of guys who play different positions and stack pretty well together. So they'll be interesting to keep an eye on. But until those guys are back in the lineup, it's pretty diminished. They're saying on this recent report on CBS, they're saying return in the final days of July for Trout maybe could be realistic. So coming up, maybe this week.
Yeah, and then let's see. Is it possible that they could make a playoff push? Where are they in the standings? Is that viable at all?
That's honestly, standings are
not
like
really
the thing I pay attention to the least, to be honest, since we just talked DFS.
There's 7.5 games of the second wild card spot, so probably not going to happen. Probably. But let's get Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani in the playoffs. Rig it up, baseball. Make something happen. Add like 8 more wild card teams. Let's have some fun. Next game on the slate here. This is a great pitching matchup, so not one where we have to talk about the offenses all that much. But Corbin Burns on the mound for Milwaukee. On the other side of the mound, we're going to have Carlos Rodon on the mound for the White Sox. These are the overall top 2 pitchers to pay up for on the slate, in my opinion. They're also priced, well above everybody else on DK, 10,600 for Burns, 10,100 for Rodon. On FanDuel, 11,200 for Burns, 10,800 for Rodon. We also have Gausman in that same price range on FanDuel and DK. But Rodon versus Burns, who is the higher priority starting pitcher for you? We have them incredibly similar in our data.
Yeah, they're pretty similar in my data as well. I do get a better projection on Rodon because I believe in the strikeout upside going up against that Brewers lineup a little bit more. There are certainly plenty of strikeouts on the table for Burns in that White Sox lineup. They come in around a 23.5% average strikeout rate. Only Adam Engel kind of stands out in what I have as the projected lineup. He's at a 15.7% strikeout rate in only 70 plate appearances. Everybody else well into the 20s. But when you look at that Brewers lineup, you get more strikeouts there. You get several guys well into the 30s. You get a lot of guys in the high 20s and mid 20s. And then you get Colton Wong up top at a 16.3 that kind of shaves it down. Manny Pena toward the bottom, if he's in the lineup, kind of shaves it down at 18.5. So taking those guys out, and they're, I guess Wong is an okay hitter, but I'm not really worried about him. Taking those guys out of the equation, you can see the obvious strikeouts on the table for Rodon. So I like him a little bit better, but these are the 2 premium pitchers on the slate. Rodon with a 36.6% strikeout rate over 96 2/3 on the season. Burns with a 37.2% over 96 innings on the season. Both have made 16 starts. Burns has a 2.07 xFIP. Rodon has a 2.91. Rodon has a .90 whip. So does Burns. They're very similar pitchers, pitching very, very well. I would be happy to take massive shares of both of them, honestly. Even walking alongside the heavy ownership on both sites, we've got them. Geez, even their ownerships are almost identical. Yeah. So, yeah, flip a coin, take whatever fantasy cruncher gives you in whichever lineups, and be happy that you're getting to these guys. I like the upside for both starters in this spot.
Yeah, and then just going over other reasons, I think these guys are really similar. So over on PrizePicks, who's sponsoring the show today, Corbin Burns, his over-under fantasy score is 42 fantasy points. They're scoring, it's pretty similar to FanDuel scoring, except there's no win or quality start bonus. And then Carlos Rodon, 41.5. So guys, remarkably similar in terms of their PrizePicks projection. And then if you check out our top pitchers tool over at Awesemo.com, we have on FanDuel, Corbin Burns versus Rodon, 11,200 for Burns, 10,800 for Rodon. Projected ownership, 28.8% for Burns, 28% for Rodon. Overall odds of being a top pitcher, 13.3% for Rodon, 13% for Burns. That is their odds being the top overall scoring pitcher on the slate. Crazy similar numbers. Get exposure to both of them. And hey, I mean, I think that if you confidently say one is going to be better than the other, I think that that's just undue confidence, because to me, I think these are very similar plays. Get exposure to both of them in large field GPPs, and they're going to be core pieces of my lineups.
In the most like contrarian approach kind of a sense, is there any interest for you in having any shares, even one share of either of these offenses?
No. It's a big enough slate, and there's enough spots to look for where, I don't feel we need to do it. We have Milwaukee with a 1.6% chance of being the top stack of the day, and the White Sox 2.2%. It's very low probability stacks. It's tough matchups. And there's just other spots I'd rather get to. The other thing too that kind of gets me against some of these stacks against ace starting pitchers is, well, number one, it's not even like they're that cheap. The Brewers are on the cheaper end. The White Sox aren't. But even if you're saving money to make Brewer stacks, like, what are you doing to pay up for pitching? Because one of the main reasons I would want to go cheap at offense is to be able to roster Carlos Rodon and Corbin Burns together. That doesn't really come into the equation if you're then rostering the offense against one of these pitchers. Although I guess you could make the case for Kevin Gausman, who's one of the pitchers in our next game here. Gausman has been very good over the course of the season. I do have some concerns about the spin rate and how that could affect him going forward. We did see him struggle his last time out. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more rough outings like that going forward. It is a favorable matchup against the Pirates, so I don't think we have to be totally off him here. However, I'm much higher on Corbin Burns and Carlos Rodon than I am Gausman.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I do actually get a little bit better of a projection on Gausman just because of that bump from the Pirates that I might have to get out of that out of my model, to be honest, because it's been working out for me this season. Or maybe it's just some recency bias in there. They burnt me a few times recently. But yeah, I agree with you on not wanting to get to either of these teams, even in the most contrarian sense, guys. You see, under 1% ownership for all the names, and there's some name brands, particularly on the White Sox. But that's not the kind of contrarian spot we want to be attacking, because you're going up against such premium pitchers. If you think about the BBB minus K numbers that I gave before with those gas can type pitchers that were around 1%, 2%, or trending into the negatives with some of those guys, Carlos Rodon is at 24.1 on this slate. Corbin Burns, 29.6. Those are massive numbers. Those are numbers that indicate that these guys are very, very likely to suppress the opposing offense and not allow any sequential hitting, not allow run creation. So just another log to throw on the fire there. These are two extreme high-end pitchers, and it's not the kind of guys you want to attack regardless of how low on the hitters are.
Yeah, and then just circling back on what I'd said before, because I think I didn't do this on purpose where I lined the games up next to each other so that Gausman would talk about right after Rodon and Burns. Once again, it's, Gausman, I think he's a fine play on most slates. I just don't like the price point relative to these other guys on the slate. So, if we look at the overall ownership going to Kevin Gausman, we have him picking up 26% ownership compared to a 16% chance to be a top pitcher today for DraftKings purposes. I would just rather get to Burns and Rodon. I'm going to have a very small amount of Gausman in my player pool, and I'll probably be underweight to him.
So I'll actually take maybe a little bit more of a stand on Gausman, I think, in terms of getting him into my lineups, because on FanDuel, he's going under 10% owns. You're paying up. You're getting him at 11,000, which is, that's the same price as Max Scherzer is on the early slate. It's 200 less than Burns, so you're not getting any major savings. I do really like the spot for him, though. I think he gets through this spot pretty clean against what is still a very weak offense. Brian Reynolds and Brian Hayes are the two names in that offense that are good hitters. Everybody else in that offense is not a good hitter, not even a major league hitter, really. There's not that much talent on this team. Sure, you can argue Adam Frazier. He's having a very nice year. I did forget about him, the all-star from this team. 324, 388, 448 on the season. Fine. He's good too. But I think Kevin Gausman gets through clean. 30.5% strikeout rate on the season, inducing 15.4% swinging strikes, suppresses offense enough. I do agree. Maybe we run into a little bit of trouble around the spin rate as things go forward, but I'm just against such a bad team when he's not getting owned to the degree that these other pitchers are. I think I'll probably press up above the field at worst on him and take some shots with Gausman against what is a very attackable Pittsburgh lineup here. Speaking of spin rate, did you see Taijuan Walker's spin rate graph, the game by game? It is.
I'll pull it up right now.
Oh my God, it's hilarious. It's just like
yeah. Listen, I mean, all the more reason that I feel. Also, once you kind of set, I find this. I don't know if you do this also. Once I kind of make up my mind about something, where it's like, hey, I like Blue Jays stacks today. Any data you put in front of me, I'll find a way to spin it into liking the Blue Jays. But I mean, I think I could do it reasonably here, which is there's a lot of inconsistency in Taijuan Walker, who on the large has been a good starting pitcher this year, but appears heading for regression. And if he's a guy who, especially when you just look at those strikeout to walk rate numbers in recent games, where if there's somebody who is that kind of inconsistency and he's going up against an offense that is no ownership, then that's just all the more reason to be like, hey, there's a little bit of reason to think that there is, variance and upside for tournament purposes. 1% stack, that is something that I would want to get to. But I am pulling up the Taijuan Walker spin rate stuff right now.
And I got to Gausman's while you were talking about that, and they're pretty equally ugly, to be honest. At least Gausman has a clean through line on his four-seamer, which is nice to see. And that's a foundational pitch for the way that he pitches with a splitter and a changeup combo. The slider concerns me, though. The slider's been all over the place, and it looks like the change is taking some major dips in the spin rate too. So he looks like he might be just looking to find an effective pitch mix. It looks like there's a couple games where he didn't throw the slider in here, a couple games where he didn't throw the change since the end of June. So maybe a little bit more concern than is creeping through in my model here, but I do still like the matchup going up against the Pirates here for Gausman. Overall, Pittsburgh is still the bottom of the league, I believe, in terms of WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They've just been a miserable offense all season. They're up to 10% below average by WRC plus, though. So they've cleaned up a little bit, but still only a 2.74% home run rate, only a 0.137 collective ISO for this team. So there's just not a big threat coming back the other way. They're good at not striking out, but I think he gets a little bit of upside here. So I don't love the price, but I do like the ownership on Gausman.
Yeah, and then something else with Gausman, if you do look at his spin rates start by start, last time he was out, which was a start he struggled, he had his lowest spin rate, average spin rate of any start for the entire season. Also, just kind of funny, I think that if you look at Baseball Savant, they compare pitchers based on who has the most similar velocity and movement. The pitcher most similar to Kevin Gausman is Chris Paddock, which that is a little bit of a concern just whenever you see Chris Paddock's name, but I don't really like comparisons all that much. I just saw that was kind of something interesting that popped up on my screen. Something else I want to talk about with the spin rate thing is I thought that Adam made a really astute point when I was doing a show with him yesterday, where he said that there's a lot of pitchers like Garrett Cole, for instance. I know Cole didn't pitch at his best yesterday, but there are a lot of these guys who are just figuring out as they go, and they're going to be developing and changing as pitchers. But there are a lot of guys who are really high-end pitchers that might have struggled in the first month or so after the foreign substance rules came into play, that are going to potentially find their pitches that they're going to be using going forward and kind of get in a groove and then finish well to finish the year. Like Garrett Cole, we've seen his strikeout numbers now way up in his last 3 starts and compared to where he was over the last month. Gausman doesn't appear to be there yet, and I don't really want to roster him heavily until we see him get back into a groove in terms of like, okay, these are the pitches he's going to be using reliably going forward. But I think that was a good point by Adam also, just pay attention to like, all right, what pitches are guys throwing? And once they finally start to find some consistency with the pitches they're using, then I think we could really evaluate who these guys are going forward. But right now, there's a whole lot of variance in Kevin Gausman, who he is as a pitcher. Up against him on the other side, Will Crowe, who I think we could reliably say is just not a good starting pitcher, because Will Crowe this year, he has struggled before pitching substance, struggled after. 6.12 ERA, 5.72 expected ERA. This Giants team will just not go away. They remain atop the standings in the NL West, largely in part because the Dodgers just can't win games right now. But that aside, the Giants are playing well. They're a team that hasn't gotten all that much attention for stacking purposes. I think this is a pretty good spot to go against Will Crowe and stack the Giants.
Absolutely. It's a team that's look at this point with this team. I'm going to just be in that, ride it till it bucks you kind of a camp, because they've been performing so well. I don't know where it's coming from necessarily. You don't really have name brands or anything like that in this lineup, but they're one of the best offenses in baseball all season long. Against right-handed pitching, they have the best team ISO, 198. They are the second best team with a 4.46 home run rate. They create runs 9% better than average. They do strike out a decent amount against righties, 25.5%. There is very little threat of Will Crow striking all that many of these guys out. 19.3% strikeout rate on the season for him, a 10.9% walk rate, 10.1% barrel ball rate. That dropped him at a negative 1.7 in that metric that I've been talking about for run creation. I love the opportunity for the Giants to hit some balls, at least drive the ball here and put some guys on base and create runs, get some decent home run marks for some of these guys in my home run model here as well. So I really like the Giants offense here, and they're not getting that much ownership attention. A little bit more on the DraftKings slate than they are on FanDuel, where they click together a little bit better, but I think they're playable on both sides.
Yeah, it's a team where I think that, and there's been spots recently where I haven't really been on the Giants, but more than anything, it's been just because I haven't really liked the spots for them overall. But today I think it's more sensible. Will Crow, I just don't think is capable of getting out big league hitters. Like I would stack against, if Will Crow is pitching against the Orioles, if Will Crow is pitching against the Rangers, I'd probably be looking to stack those offenses against them. So I don't think Will Crow is particularly good. Couple games left to talk about here. It is, for my money, the most fun team to watch in baseball right now, the Los Angeles Dodgers against the Colorado Rockies. The reason being the Dodgers, who knows how they're going to collapse late in games. I know the collapse is coming. Yesterday was tie game 6-6, bottom of the ninth inning, after they'd already blown a lead against a terrible Rockies team. The Dodgers bases loaded, no outs, tie game, bottom of the ninth, 3 strikeouts in a row. Will Smith swings at 3 pitches, nowhere near the strike zone. Then it was, I forget who it was they had pinch hit. I think it might have been Noose who came in and struck out also, but whatever it was, they were not able to get the runs in when it was 6-6, bases loaded, tie game, bottom of the ninth. Dodgers go on to lose the game. Tony Gonsolin as a starting pitching option. Here's the issue I have with him. It's a great matchup. We just never see him work all that deep into games. So the price has finally come down to a little bit more of a manageable level at 8,000 on DraftKings, but I just don't think he's going to work deep enough into the game to be relevant today.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Looks like my model's kind of agreeing with that as well in terms of the innings that it gave him. So I do think he's a talented kid. I do think he's a good pitcher. We've seen him in the past in that like hybrid, gets a start here and there, pitches out of the bullpen here and there kind of a role. But just looking through his innings pitched so far this season, primarily in starts, only one of these is a non-start. 3 1/3, 4, 5 1/3, 3, 4, 3 2/3, 3 2/3, 1 2/3. He just doesn't give you enough overall depth to really be reliable. The Rockies are terrible. It's a great spot. He should project better if we give him a few additional innings, face a few additional hitters. He's not getting owned. 6,500 on the FanDuel slate. If you wanted a total wild dart throw and you are spending all that money wisely, maybe if you get 5 innings out of him, he puts up a decent start here. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I don't think he's got the shot to get the quality start bonus for you on FanDuel, which is so important. So I wouldn't play him over there. 8,000 it's down, but I think it's probably still a little bit too expensive for him on DK. If he was in that like 6,500 range on the DraftKings slate, I think he'd be a lot more interesting as an SP2 over there against this team. But like we said, he's been pitching well, 26.8% strikeout rate, inducing 12.8% swinging strikes. 35.1% hard hit rate is very good. Allows a few too many barrels with 9.5% barrel ball and an 18.2 degree launch angle. But the hard hit isn't low enough that it's not getting him in trouble. And I don't really see many threats in this Rockies lineup. So I would like the spot in a more reliable inning situation.
Yeah, and that's really, to me, like if we find out that Tony Gonsolin is going to be unrestricted pitch count, then you make a little more sense on FanDuel. DraftKings 8,000. There's still just other players that I'd like to roster over him. But now let's talk about the Dodgers as a stack, because Kyle Freeland is a guy who's had a little bit more success as of late than he had earlier in the season. All in all, if you look at our top stack tool, it does look like the Dodgers are going about appropriately owned. The other thing, too, with Kyle Freeland is keep in mind his numbers are a little inflated because he makes half his starts at Coors Field. The other thing also, pretty heavy ground ball pitcher, so that makes it a little hard to find a whole lot of success against him. That also, Cody Bellinger is most likely going to be out tonight. He was dealing with an injury yesterday. So the Dodgers, I think it's just about a fair team. I don't really think they're underowned, overowned, just about appropriate. I don't think there's any real issue with just getting even with the 6 or 7% of Dodger stacks the field has.
Yeah, I might actually end up even a little bit lower than that, just based on where some of these guys are priced and where some of these guys are still owned on the FanDuel slate in the projections. Like AJ Pollock hitting out of the 2 spot, pulling almost 25% ownership on FanDuel because it costs 2,600. I don't know that I need that or that's that appealing in terms of building stacks with the top of this lineup. And then it gets kind of bumpy toward the back end with Albert in there, then Zach McKinstry, friend of the program, Woody C. Sheldon Nuesi is in the projected lineup, coming in at the min price. So maybe you go there. Billy McKinney, yeah, it's not great. It's not the premium Dodgers lineup by any means, with no Mookie, no Cody Bellinger in it. So I don't really need to get here if the public's going to be there to this degree. Even in going up against Kyle Freeland, like you said, he is not a good pitcher by any means. Doesn't strike out a lot of guys. He's got a targetable BBB minus K number. So I don't mind the idea that the Dodgers can string some hits together, but it's just not a great version of this lineup when there are other good spots for hitting. So I think I would probably be underweight to even the where the field is now on Dodger stacks.
Yeah, and I'm also interested to see like what that lineup's going to look like. Every time it seems like the Dodgers are getting healthy, somebody else gets hurt. We've got Clayton Kershaw is banged up right now. I wouldn't put Trevor Bauer in the hurt category, but he's away from the team. And then Cody Bellinger's hurt now. It's just been constantly rotating hitters in and out of the lineup. So tough for them to stay healthy. Ultimately, I still think they do end up coming back to win the division, but what I see, they do seem to shoot themselves in the foot just about every night at this point. Final game on the slate, and then we're finally going to be wrapping up. So guys, do us a favor. Terry and I have been here all morning hanging out with you guys, and people just so enthusiastic about us in the YouTube chat right now for a variety of reasons. But do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Terry and I will both be coming up later in the day to do more content. But final game here, Oakland A's, Seattle Mariners, Chris Bassett on the mound against Logan Gilbert. So now Chris Bassett, I have just not been on him very heavily at all this year. And there's always some reason that I prefer other guys to him. And today it's just there are other pitchers I think are better than him once again. So Chris Bassett, 9,700 on DK, but we have Carlos Rodon or on FanDuel at 9,700, but we have Carlos Rodon and Corbin Burnes to pay up for. On DK, Chris Bassett is priced up to 9,900. So once again, the opportunity cost of rostering Chris Bassett likely means you aren't getting to guys like Corbin Burnes or Carlos Rodon. I just can't prioritize Bassett with these other guys on the slate. Are you willing to try to talk me into him?
I think we can get there. I mean, he's going up against a Mariners team for starters that is sitting third worst in baseball with a 25.6% collective strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. Create runs 9% worse than average. 157 collective ISO, well below average. Right around the middle of the league with 3.58% home run rate. So I think there's certainly enough strikeouts in this lineup for Bassett to succeed here, have a decent start. 97 is definitely creeping up into that territory where it's like, all right, this is probably more of your high $8,000 kind of a pitcher. 125 innings. He gives you great depth of start, over 20 starts, only a 24.8% strikeout rate. That's comfortably around or above the league average, 5.7% walk rate, but he's not going to give you that 35% strikeout rate pitcher. He's not that guy, but he does induce 10.2% swinging strikes. He limits hard hit extremely well, 32.5% hard hit rate, 87.4 mile an hour average exit velo, 7% barrel ball rate is totally fine. So I think he's at worst safe here. And I think there's a touch of upside given the fact that there were so many strikeouts in that Mariners lineup. At 5% ownership, it's easy enough to go double the field without really hurting too many of your shares of Carlos Rodon. Like, I'm happy to make that change and get off of some of the Rodon popularity, even though I think he's projecting out so well. I get Bassett at a decent, comparable enough projection where for 1,000 in savings, I think it makes some sense to grab some of that low ownership and at least muscle up over the field on Bassett here.
All right. And then final pitcher on the slate, final match to talk about here. Walk you through Logan Gilbert, who's pitched actually exceptionally well for the Mariners this year. 3.5 ERA, 3.57 expected ERA. Good strikeout stuff at 28.3%. The matchup is brutal against Oakland. I think Gilbert's been good enough that I'm not really looking to stack the A's against him. But is Logan Gilbert potentially an SP2 option to be willing to get to in this kind of matchup, just given the amount of success he's had?
It's tricky. I don't love tangling with this A's lineup, given their general upside. They're above average in most of these categories. 173 collective ISO, only a 23.2% strikeout rate in the split. Create runs 3% better than average, 3.68% home run rate, which is right around the league average. So they're just a good enough offense in general that I don't love throwing pitchers unless it's a premium pitcher into the mix against them. And then you get extreme power bats like Matt Olson in there who could do damage on his own just if a couple guys get on base. So I don't love that idea. I wouldn't necessarily be stacking A's against Logan Gilbert, though, like you said. I think he is a good pitcher. He's a premium prospect. 54 innings over this course of the season, 11 starts, 28.3% strikeout rate, only walks 5.5% of hitters. Nice induced swinging strike rate at 13.3%. For 7,800 on the DraftKings slate, you could probably talk me into some shares as an SP2. I wouldn't be happy or comfortable about it, but I think it makes some sense over there, given the fact that you're not dealing with that same idea of extreme opportunity cost in rostering him over one of these other premium pitchers on where you only get one on the FanDuel slate. So for me, as an SP2 on DK, he'd at least be on the back end of my list. I don't think I would be getting to him on FanDuel.
All right, that is going to do it for us. We've talked about everything here, the early slate, the main slate, all million games that are being played today. Terry and I hit them all. Guys, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have more MLB content coming up later in the day. There's also MMA Live Before Lock coming up. And don't forget also, if you want to check out PrizePicks, head on over to PrizePicks.com. Use the promo code Awesemo. Put your first deposit down and get up to a $100 bonus using that promo code Awesemo. That'll do it for us. Have a good one, guys.